Hi everyone, welcome to Is It Art, where we ask the same question every time. Today we're going to be looking at Tiger King, the cultural phenomena which has gripped meme pages across the internet, and its hidden connections with coronavirus. Specifically, we want to do a deep dive into finding out an explanation for why this show is so popular right now. Now, I want to start off by clearing the air a little bit and saying that I'm not going to be spending time talking about this ridiculous theory that because we're in quarantine, we're all bored and have somehow lost all selective criteria for the media that we consume. The coronavirus has something to do with the popularity, but I think it's a little bit more nuanced than we just have time and there's nothing else to watch. And so in order to understand that, we kind of have to start wondering what the coronavirus means. And it turns out that it means a lot of things. A global pandemic is pretty ripe with meaning. It could mean the end of the human race and all civilization as we know it. Probably not. Probably not. It could mean that. Probably not, though. One thing it definitely means, though, is that a lot of people are laid off. A lot of people can't go to work. They've either been released from their job permanently or temporarily. A lot of people are worried about how to pay their bills, how to pay rent, what happens when the money runs out. It means that the government is looking at a lot of spending. They've dumped $1.5 trillion into Wall Street. We're seeing layoffs. We're seeing strains in our healthcare infrastructure. We're seeing a lot of very strong economic impacts of the coronavirus, which are easy to track, much easier than the virus itself or how we would gauge the healthcare ramifications or safety of individuals. So what does this have to do with Joe Exotic? Well, I think that two things. One, he offers escapism. You know, the characters in Tiger King are absurd. They're so cartoonish. They're ridiculous. And there's something just scrumptious about the murder mystery. And it's kind of a murder mystery inside of a murder mystery, which is nice. They represent such a disruption in normal behavior that it's like a car accident that you can't look away from. You're just drawn to it. Like, how is he blowing up his own mattress? How is he shooting this dummy in the head that says Carol Baskin? Like, how many animals did they own? How are they doing this? How are all these wives and husbands being exchanged? And there's this real kind of reality show-esque trash TV fascination where you can just get lost in the craziness that is unfolded in Tiger King and, at least for a little while, seemingly forget about your current predicament. And that kind of keys into one of the reasons people watch film media in general. I don't think it tells the whole story, though, because the other side of it is a really fascinating inspection into what capital means in America, what class society looks like, the different ways that class consciousness is formed. And it all centers around the image of a tiger. To understand that class consciousness element, we should take a moment and think about what tigers mean. Like literal tigers. Because that's what the show is about. It's about people that own literal tigers. One of my first encounters with the image of a tiger was a library poster of a little orange kitten with a tiger above it. And it said something like, "Dare to dream," you know? So this upward movement. Tigers represent power, majesty, regality, this kind of upper echelon of hierarchy, especially with their own social structures, which are frankly crudely re-articulated by the various exotic pet owners, these kind of harems that they have going on. But tigers represent entrance into the elite in some way. The idea of that those that own tigers are elite, that they have access to things that other people don't have access to. And in this way, the tiger kind of functions as a crude, childlike fetish object for capital, for having money, for wealth, for the sort of elite aristocratic bourgeois dream, is to be in a place where you have such excess, such opulence, that you could own a tiger. The thing, though, is that wealthy people don't really own tigers. That's that absurd notion. And even though tigers are expensive and exclusive, they aren't really a parallel to what Jeff Bezos is up to, what Mark Zuckerberg is up to. Instead, they represent a sort of miscalculation, a kind of translation error between what wealth actually is and what it looks like to the characters in this show. So we should take a moment then to look at the characters in the show. There's Joe Exotic, gay man, grew up poor, Oklahoma, disowned by his father, whose sole occupation has this kind of narcissistic drive for acceptance and to be the best, to be dominant, to be loved, to be everywhere, whether it's his musical career, so to speak, his internet show, his governor race, the fact that he's housing tigers for Michael Jackson or has Shaq visiting his zoo. It's this constant drive for upward mobility, recognition, etc. But it's coming from a place, it's situated from Oklahoma poverty and social rejection. And then if you go to Carol Baskins, again, grew up poor, exposed to violence and sexual assault from an early age, was a teen mother in an abusive relationship, fled that, and then acquired wealth through marriage, and then probably killed her husband, probably. Mario Trabeau, coming from a drug dealing family, which draws an interesting parallel, that someone would come from drug dealing, do time in federal prison, come out and then get into exotic pet ownership, draws an interesting line between illicit entrepreneurial activities. If anyone has a more than kind of glancing understanding of the drug trade, part of the reason why it's popular is because its entry point is relatively low. That as opposed to getting investors for your venture capital startup, you finding out where to buy drugs and sell drugs for a lot of really impoverished areas doesn't have the same legal red tape. It doesn't have the same kind of like class barriers around it. And so drug dealing represents a kind of entrepreneurial activity that is available to people that are otherwise barred from all other entrepreneurial activities. In much the same way, most of the characters in this show are felons. Most of the people involved in the exotic animal trade are felons. They're barred from voting. They're barred from most legitimate jobs, and instead find, expression in another illicit entrepreneurial activity. And then there's Doc Antle, who I don't really know what to say about him. He makes me uncomfortable. He seems like a bad dude. I will say that, coming from his parents' cattle ranch or whatever, his one of his big entry points into his position right now was 1982, when Exxon wanted him to host tigers at their annual convention. So again, you have tigers serving as this means of entry point into a class that would otherwise be, how else would a kid, son of a cattle rancher, get in with executives from ExxonMobil? Come on. The animals are a clear entry point to levels of capital, levels of class that were otherwise denied to these people. So we have the characters: Joe Exotic, Carol Baskins, Doc Antle, Mario. What do these stars have in common in their backstory, in their psychology? One, narcissism. Everyone's a flagrant narcissist, which I think, if we're taking tigers as like an image of capital, a sort of crude image of the aristocracy, this fetishistic attachment to this one image as their identity, as what they are, as is clearly represented in, frankly, all of them, but most specifically Carol Baskin's in her all cat attire, her entire wardrobe being cat print, even though she's allergic to cats. 2, poverty. 3, desire for class mobility. And 4, and this is sort of a key point for the show, is a seeming financial illiteracy. I mean, these people are dealing with huge sums of money, don't get me wrong, and they have access to things that I don't have access to, but they make such mistakes, such crude, absurd mistakes, left and right, whether it's in lawyers' fees or funding political campaigns with private money, or thinking that transferring ownership to your mom would somehow shelter assets. These people seemingly have no idea what to do with money when it's around them, but they want it. They want it so badly. And that disjunct, that distance between their desire for capital, the crudeness of their understanding, and the errors, the ways they clearly don't actually understand the system that they find themselves in, I think is where we return back to COVID-19 and the coronavirus. Because for all the people that are watching the stock market crash, that are finding themselves unemployed, worried about finances in a way that they hadn't in, a decade, maybe their entire adult life, there's this shocking realization that you don't know where you are, that you actually are not literate in these areas, that you're kind of over your head. And to see this cast of characters with their absurdity and their melodrama representing a desire for access to capital and a total ignorance of it seems to simultaneously give relief and identification. You can feel what they're going through. It gives you an expression for unsaid desires, unsaid anxieties, this sort of unsaid building pressure. It gives expression to that. But since it's about something as absurd as owning tigers, there's enough ironic distance there that you don't feel that your fate is entwined with Joe Exotic's. You're definitely different than Joe Exotic. But also, there's such a structural parallel between what's happening in these circles, the desires of the people in the circles, and the ways in which they find themselves, outmatched, uneducated, powerless in a way to these different movements, kind of gives expression to an otherwise unsaid anxiety that most of working America is feeling right now. That anxiety is that your job has disappeared, that the economy is crashing, that supermarkets are running out of toilet paper, all of these things. Just to say it all succinctly, try to track down the coronavirus, what it means socially, economically, for individual lives, individual careers. It's all too big. It's all too much. We can't pin it down. We can't grasp it in any way, but we know we should be doing something. And what Tiger King has provided in the melodrama of these exotic animal owners, through their history of poverty, through their attempts at wealth acquisition, through their clear trials in maneuvering a system that they definitely don't understand, has given us something that we can latch on to. We can talk about it, we can laugh about it, because it's so absurd, and in a sense find a relief from our actual predicament. And now there is another dimension, culturally speaking, of Tiger King that I want to touch on real fast. And that is the sort of battleground between queerness and heteronormativity that is represented in the characters of Joe Exotic and Carol Baskins. Now, obviously, neither one of these people are role models, and neither one of them should be understood as the ideal of either one of these social movements. But it's pretty striking the way in which you have, on the one hand, this Oklahoma mullet cowboy gay man tiger owner, crude, ridiculous, outgoing, breaking all the rules, breaking taboos, kind of rivaled with this seemingly extremely heteronormative person who excretes repression. Her and her husband, it looks like she found an accountant somewhere and then put a leash on him. And this repression then kind of builds and comes up with this absurd expression in her over-identification with big cats. And Carol's taking the moral high ground, the position that hers is the right way, and that these other people are degenerate in some capacity. The other people, by the way, represent queerness in a bunch of different varieties, whether it's homosexuality or polyamory, or just the differences in their lifestyles, that most of them are off of the grid. And so there's this other side of it, which is this sort of queerness of Joe Exotic, which ends up being tainted pretty heavily when his relationship with his husbands comes to an end, one with suicide, one fully disowning him, and this kind of attribution that it was all a manipulative game. Yet the manipulation is juxtaposed on Carol Baskin's side, where her husband, there's shots of him literally in a leash. She's got him dressed as an animal. He's clearly just doing whatever she wants. He says that his goal in life is to keep her happy. They're both condemned, but the style and the actions that take them to this place of condemnation by the end of it are so distinct that they represent a cultural clash between a kind of repressed, moral authoritarian, heteronormative, almost WASP-like culture, and this outrageous breaking the taboos, I'll read your diary online, I'll shoot a mannequin that has your face on it, outlandishness. Again, to bring it back to coronavirus, we're in a lockdown. We are forced to be doing social distancing. We can't have group gatherings. We're not supposed to touch each other. We're not supposed to be around each other. It's a kind of state-sanctioned repression that all of America is feeling. And so then to see this dynamic played out, again, this backcountry melodrama between two people, which again should not be thought of as role models. They're not good. Neither one of them is good, and neither one of them represents these movements in any sort of idealistic way. But the ways in which their flaws manifest structurally speak to this dynamic in a way that, because we're in lockdown from coronavirus, is probably uniquely interesting to Americans right now. So why is Tiger King so popular? Because it's an absurd fairy tale expression of people trying to maneuver their image of capital within capitalism at the same time that most Americans are wondering about how they're supposed to maneuver this in a time of unprecedented uncertainty and where people are probably feeling more financially illiterate than ever. And at the same time, it keys in on questions of repression that social distancing elicits, yet it addresses these anxieties in such a cartoonish way that no one feels guilty or personally connected to what's going on, but they still can't look away. So Tiger King, is it art? Yeah, you betcha. It's art, all right. Well, hey, if you disagree, let me know. Leave a comment below. If you like the video, give it a subscribe. Do me a favor. I gotta reach a certain number before I can get my own URL instead of this de facto bunk one they sent me. But let me know your opinions. If you disagree, you agree, I'd love to hear about it. And subscribe if you want to see any other content, analysis, discussions of different cultural objects. Love to hear your suggestions. Till next time.